we had really a very challenging start to the pandemic. If I can just speak frankly, there was about a month or 6 weeks where things were just spiraling downwards in terms of clients canceling service. I have a pretty strong network of other people that run home care agencies around the country, and we all got together a lot more frequently. There's a group of us that meet on a quarterly basis, but we actually started meeting every Friday. And probably for the first quarter of the pandemic, we met Friday every week just to share and help each other and think through problems.
Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. This is a show for men and women in the workplace who want to move from the predictable to the potent. This is your weekly dose of inspiration with an edge. I talk with CEOs and shamans, sports marketing executives and therapists. All of us are like-minded thinkers and doers who tell stories, share wisdom, and challenge each other to have the best life possible inside and outside the office. Welcome to your Warrior Conversation.
Hey everybody, it's Jeannie. Thank you so much for joining me here at the Warriors at Work show. So I'm continuing to have conversations all month long with executives about the return to work, the subject that is front and center on everyone's minds these days. And I had the benefit of talking with founder and chief executive officer Greg Solometo, who co-founded a home healthcare business called Alliance Homecare in 2006, after he took care of his grandmother for 5 years when she was suffering from Alzheimer's. And it was from that experience that he saw the need for greater home health care. And so he partnered with some of his colleagues and founded this really successful business. And a lot of it, which you're going to hear about in how he storytells, is built upon this philosophy called the grandma rule. This is somebody who really embodies not only tremendous business acumen, huge heart, but a genuine, honest, and goodness care for the people that he is in service to, his home healthcare community. And it was an absolute pleasure to break down Greg's experiences, particularly in the last year and a half, and for him to tell you some of the things that they did as an organization. They had to be incredibly nimble and adjust on the fly to a constantly evolving experience in the healthcare world. It was my distinct pleasure to have a conversation with Greg, and I'm thrilled to bring this conversation to all of you. Welcome to Warriors at Work. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. So today we're talking about things like adaptability, shared purpose, shared mission. And we're also talking about what we as leaders, entrepreneurs, business owners can do to expand our capacity in the world by using this wild time in business as a vehicle of learning. And I have with me CEO and co-founder of Alliance Homecare, Greg Solometo. Greg, thank you so much for joining me here today in this conversation.
Thanks a lot for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
So where I thought we could start, you have such a fascinating background, starting in corporate America, working for a financial services organization. You had a very personal experience where you were caring for your grandmother who had Alzheimer's, which is where the idea of Alliance Homecare came to you. And now here you are, CEO, co-founder of this business. And I'd love to just take a step back and have you introduce yourself. How would you describe who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I guess the quickest way I tell people what I do is we essentially take care of grandma and grandpa. I tell people we have a private duty nursing and home care company, and we take care of people's grandparents or parents as they age at home. And people get that really quickly, whether they have either gone through it themselves or they've gone through it with maybe their husband or wife has gone through it, so their in-laws have needed care. But a lot of people and even younger generations have seen it happen with their grandparents or are going through that with a neighbor or an aunt or uncle or somebody that they care about. Really, at some point or another, everyone is going to go through this circumstance and unfortunately have a good understanding of what we're doing.
And as
to describe me as a person, I mean, I guess my friends would describe me as very outgoing, adventurous. I definitely am a people person. I always have been. I was raised as an only child. I guess we can get into that a little bit in terms of the history of the company as it relates. But I was an only child, and I always was surrounded by older people. So I always resonated to older people in my life. I think that only children tend to grow up a bit quicker. That's just my theory. I'm not a psychologist, but my theory is that they do grow up faster and they do align themselves with older populations, whether it's parents or grandparents, much quicker. So I always had that delineation towards the elderly.
And talk to us about your leadership philosophy.
So I guess my leadership philosophy comes from a couple of backgrounds, but I mainly focus it towards an experience I had growing up. There was a family-owned company that I was around quite a bit, and I saw the closeness of all the team and employees. They were really like family, and they had a lot of outings and summer barbecues and certain things that happened throughout the year that really brought everybody together. So I really loved being part of an organization that felt like family. You know, you spend so much time at work. You know, the people at work are people you spend more time with many times than most members of your family. Even sometimes your significant other, depending on what they do and their availability. So I always found it really valuable to have a family-like atmosphere. And that is, of course, very easier to accomplish when you're a smaller company. The challenge, of course, is when you start growing and developing the business and you start scaling the business. It is challenging to retain that family-like atmosphere, but we certainly do our best at creating that kind of atmosphere. Obviously, in COVID, it's even more difficult given that a lot of functions went virtual. And I know you want to get into that a little bit later. But the second thing that influenced me really was my experience and education in the financial services. I actually was a lean engineer, which essentially there are lean and Six Sigma type of practices or engineering practices that go towards improvement of operations. And a lot of that, the ethos of that is about continuous learning. There's a Japanese term called Kaizen, which is continuous improvement. And it's the idea and the concept that you never stop learning, you never stop growing, exploring. You really have to set up the culture of a company so that everybody feels empowered and comfortable making decisions, putting out ideas, even if ideas are wrong or bad or not the ones that get chosen ultimately, they still feel comfortable putting them forward. And that's really important, getting everybody's perspective from the lowest level employee all the way up to the CEO and everybody in between. I think that that is really powerful to harness everybody's creative abilities and problem-solving abilities.
That's so interesting what you just said. So it's really what you honed in on is how to create an organization that has a family-like feel while you're growing and expanding. And then secondly, I love the philosophy around continuous improvement. And clearly you've built an organization based upon that, but also this level of curiosity that goes along with it and asking questions and encouraging people to contribute to that shared mission, that shared value, and that shared purpose, which is something that I'd love to dive into. One of the things that you made mention of when we first talked was this idea of the grandma rule. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I guess skipping forward to when we started the company and we essentially developed our company and got our license with the Department of Health, et cetera. We started off, I co-founded the company with two friends that I grew up with that are both nurses. And they had a group of nurses that were essentially doing private duty nursing. and many of them worked in the top hospitals in New York City. But they focused on the nursing side of the business. But my area of interest was really around the care I had created for my grandmother, which was around caregiving and home health aides and caregivers in the home. And that's essentially what you really need when you have something like Alzheimer's or dementia or Parkinson's, more advanced stages. You need really experienced caregivers. So that was the area I felt passionate about. So I focused on interviewing and really building up and recruiting all of the first few years that we started the business. I was the recruiter and I was the interviewer. And essentially, I interviewed probably upwards of around 1,000 caregivers over the course of 2 or 3 years. And during that time period, I used, a set of criteria to ask questions when I was interviewing everybody, but I got very good at it. But ultimately, what it boiled down to, I would just think of my grandmother. Would I hire this person to take care of my grandmother? Do I trust them implicitly? Is there a gut feeling? And that's, unfortunately, it's a very subjective type of thing, but it resonates with everybody. Would they allow that person to come into their home and take care of their mom or dad, grandmother, grandfather? And if the answer is yes, we would hire them and work with them and give them an opportunity at least to work with some of our clients. And if we were shaky or no, then we would take a pass on adding them to our pool. So in that developed the grandma rule. And so I was doing all the original interviewing, like I said, at the very beginning of the company. And I used the grandma rule, which we eventually trademarked nationally, TGR. And the grandma rule is something that we own as a trademark, a service agreement, but it is, a service mark. But nevertheless, that concept or DNA has translated down to other members of the company whose function is to recruit and bring on more caregivers and nurses. So everybody thinks about their own family members when they're hiring. And that's not just for caregivers or people in the field that we hire. That also translates to people that we hire for inside the company for operations, executive leadership, mid-level management, any individual contributor that comes inside the company, everybody that has interviewed them, and usually people have done 4 or 5 interviews before they've gotten the offer with different members of the company, but everybody has said yes to the fact that they feel that they represent the concept of the grandma rule.
I was curious too, imagining myself being in like a visioning or strategic planning session with you and your executive team. How often does the grandma rule come into that when you're deciding initiatives and scaling or different evolutions that you're considering?
I don't know that it comes up in a pointed manner like you're speaking of. I think it does come up from time to time. We actually just regrouped ourselves about a month ago, and we are reestablishing our purpose, vision, and values. And that's been a really interesting process. And as the company has evolved, again, like I said, it's one thing when you're a small company with 10 or 12 people working at it, but now we have about 50 people inside the organization and around 500 people on payroll. And that becomes a slightly different circumstance. You have to keep that messaging going, and you have to intentionally keep focus and on your values. So I think the grandma rule does come up when you're talking about values. It comes up when you're developing best practices that impact the client and their family. But it also comes up when talking about caregivers and how we treat them and how we take care of them. So we look after our caregivers, and they are so important to us. But that is the front line of our company, and that's what touches our client to the client, our employees to the client themselves is really the frontline caregivers. And so how we recruit and then how we treat them once they're on board is really impactful. And the grandma role always kind of dovetails that back into that same mission. So everybody gets it. And I think so it comes up, but it's more something in the background that's kind of part of DNA and part of fabric of who we are than something that has to be talked about necessarily intentionally in meetings.
I love that. And the way that I was translating it in my mind, and for anybody watching, listening, whether you're running an organization, you're a leader of a business, we're always thinking about customer.
How does this relate to the customer? Would the customer like this? Would the customer want this? Is this a product or service that represents our values, our culture? And the way you just talked about it, there's so much texture and it pulls through everything you do. How you all think, how you show up, how you take your roles very, very seriously, which is really my next question. I mean, home healthcare business and the team you have, I mean, talk about being right in the middle of the most extraordinary circumstance we've ever seen in our lifetime. One of the things that you talked about with me when you reflected on the last year and a half, you talked about how important it was to adapt, and how you all really did that very, very well. You adapted and you overcame. And I'd love for you to share a little context to that.
Sure. So I guess taking ourselves back to the beginning of the pandemic, early middle March of 20, everything happened so quickly. And for a company like ours, if you think about what we do, we're basically a staffing company that provides care, human capital resources into people's homes. And so that process is very personal. It's very hands-on. The recruiting of that, the coordination and the scheduling of that, and then people showing up. So we had really a very challenging start to the pandemic. If I can just speak frankly, there was about a month or 6 weeks where things were just spiraling downwards in terms of clients canceling service. The bottom 10 to 15% of our client population everybody was nervous about having care inside the home, but people were nervous about bringing in an unknown virus into their home, rightfully so. So the idea of having home care was very scary to people, especially that were new. So a lot of people were canceling service, and it eventually stabilized in mid or late April to the people and clients that really absolutely needed care. And at some point, there's a ratio of risk and need that was overcome by the fact that if somebody has advanced Alzheimer's, they need care, whether there's a virus out there or not. It doesn't matter. We just have to do the very best we can to handle it. So anyhow, we had a massive logistical challenge in terms of getting PPE equipment into the hands of all of our caregivers, procuring that equipment, finding that there weren't really any solutions. People didn't have solutions yet. Everybody was looking to each other. I have a pretty strong network of other people that run home care agencies around the country, and we all got together a lot more frequently. There's a group of us that meet on a quarterly basis, but we actually started meeting every Friday. And probably for the first quarter of the pandemic, we met Friday every week, just to share and help each other and think through problems, but to obtain masks and gloves and all kinds of things that we never really needed it in bulk before. So it was a very difficult time, and that combined with the fact that we all went virtual. So like I said, the way that we operate and as a family is very close knit. Our main operation, we have two main offices, one in New York City and one out in Long Island, out in the suburbs of New York, that service that area. But we operate in that office very effectively, but everybody had to move and go virtual. And so to recruit virtually and to schedule and staff clients virtually and to coordinate with clients directly on how things were going virtually was very different for us. It was a complete 180 to what we had been doing a few months before. Our team adapted in an unbelievable way. And I don't know why exactly. I do know why. It's because we have amazing people and because we use the grandma rule to hire people. So everybody is working towards a shared mission. This isn't really a job for most people that work here at Alliance. It's a career and it's a mission, and everybody understands the heavy responsibility we have towards the families that we look after and the caregivers that we have in the field. We're responsible for them, and we need to look out for their safety and their well-being. So people were working relentlessly during that time period. And in fact, we had to really start looking out a few months in towards burnout for people. We really had to make sure that people were taking time to themselves. It's very hard when you go virtual and you're from the minute you wake up till the end of your day, you're kind of nonstop. I think they call it Zoom fatigue is a word that I've heard from a lot of people across industries. But we definitely were a victim of that. We had to make sure other people were taking time for themselves to, separate work and personal life and spend time with their families and take time off and eventually start taking vacation or just staycation or whatever that looked like, but to separate themselves. But I think the team effort and the shared mission is what really drove people together. And I think that's what enabled us to really excel and almost thrive in that circumstance. We really did. We did very well as a company during that time period. And I know from talking to other leaders in other industries, not everybody fared as well. And of course, it depends on your product or service, what you're doing. Certainly that some people gained a lot of business during that time period, but most people really struggled. And we did very well during that time period. And I'm very, very thankful to our team for that.
I'm curious, you mentioned that, in the beginning days, there was a big drop in clients. Mm-hmm. How did you get your clients to feel comfortable with Alliance Homecare? And then you basically took a difficult situation and in essence, really turned it around. So tell us more about like that pivot that happened, not comfortable to all of a sudden, okay, I'm okay with this.
Sure. I think the biggest circumstance was probably two factors. One, completely new customers. So people that were just getting to know us or were just getting into needing home care. So they didn't have a lot of experience. So everybody was new. The company would be new. The caregivers would be new. Those circumstances take a while, weeks or months, usually really to tease out and to develop those bonds. And that level of trust, it gets earned time and time again over a long period of time with what we do. And so I think for newer people, they just didn't have time to maybe develop those bonds or the needs weren't as great. The care needs weren't as great as others that remained on service. The other factor, again, for clients that were legacy or that were on a platform for some period of time before the pandemic hit, they knew us. They knew what we were about. They knew our caregivers, and they knew the schedulers and the care managers that oversee cases that previously had been visiting the home on a weekly or biweekly basis. They weren't able to visit anymore, but they were calling. So they were doing as much as they could to keep those touch points and to keep communication lines open, emails, phone calls, et cetera, as opposed to in-person visits. But those touch points remained. So those clients understood our value and that had developed trust already, continued trusting us to provide care. And so that's where we saw that. And it took about 6 weeks for that to sort of shake out. And I developed a temporary version of high blood pressure during the months of March and April. I literally had high blood pressure. It came back down in May when things calmed down, but I think everybody was really just so stressed out and just watching this unravel. Everybody was, felt like they were losing some element of control. So that was difficult on everybody.
How did you steady yourself through that wild peak?
Well, I think meditation helped. I actually have been meditating every morning for about 5 years, and that has definitely helped calm myself down. I think I just understood that this is part of a broader scheme. When I started speaking to other industry leaders and I started speaking to other people, that were running businesses, I also realized that there were people a lot worse off than we were. So for example, I'm in a Vistage group. Vistage is like a CEO coaching group, and there's 15 other owners in that. We meet monthly. One of them owns a fairly large in New York dog grooming and bathing facility, and they have about 15 locations around Manhattan, and they actually had to close 13 of their 15 locations Obviously, they were faced with much more extreme circumstances and layoffs and furloughs. We actually never laid off or furloughed a single person during the pandemic, which was pretty rare. And we were really lucky. And I think that our team felt and realized that as they saw their friends and their personal networks of people getting laid off or furloughed and losing their livelihoods, we were still actively working and working hard. So I got perspective from other companies, and I felt that, ultimately, even though things were on a internal or on a near-term downwards trajectory, they did flatline and then sort of build themselves back up. And I realized that we were in a fairly good situation, actually, from a high level perspective.
How have you changed when you think about the Greg that was in the world pre-COVID to the Greg that's in the world now? How have you changed?
That's a good question. I would say that I am slower paced and more intentional right now. I think that one of the benefits, there were certainly some silver linings of COVID, and it's a horrible circumstance, of course, and many people died and or had very difficult circumstances. I personally had COVID, and I had a fairly bad version of it. I was very sick for about 12 days, and ultimately had our own nurses come to my house and take care of me to recuperate. But I think the benefits of COVID were that people slowed down a bit. The benefits were that people spent more time with family. You realized what's important. I have a 3-year-old daughter. She was 2 when this started. I spent the vast majority of her second year on the planet with her, and I was really thankful for that time. And that time I would have been otherwise commuting or physically at work, and I was here. I was still working, but I was able to spend a lot more time. So I think people spent more time with their families. They downshifted in some of the turbo that we have gotten used to as normal course of business or business as usual. It's not healthy for people to work so enormously hard, or for people to be running at such a speed for such a long duration of time. And I think that this pandemic did slow people down, and I think that was a net benefit to what we do. So that changed me. I think I slowed down quite a bit. I realized what my priorities were in life. And of course, it's to run a successful business, but it's also to take care of myself, to look out for my family, and to spend time with people I care about. And I think that really came to the forefront during the last 18 months.
I love the word turbo. That is such a great way to describe life. I would often joke that I think I might have been sleepwalking through my life, just going from thing to thing like a pinball, and then be like, oh, that's right. Oh, that's right. And then now it's like front and center, where you are, what's going on. I think it's really, really important. I read an article that was published in Entrepreneur magazine about you, and I wanted to talk about this quote by Teddy Roosevelt. Do what you can with what you have where you are. Say more about what that means to you.
I think it's really wise words. First of all, Theodore Roosevelt was one of the smartest people and presidents we have ever had in this country. I've read his biography, and his life was extraordinary in what he was able to accomplish. But I think that do what you can with what you have where you are really means that you have at your disposal resources, and you have to appreciate those and work with those, as opposed to looking around and seeing what other people may have. So that can mean something professionally, but that can also work for you personally. I use them in both parts of my life, professionally and personally. But I think that I just appreciate the moment. I appreciate the things that I do have, and I try to focus on utilizing those things to the best of my ability. Sometimes that's resources, and sometimes that's skill sets. And again, I think where we are right now as a company, we have gotten to a point where really have to look at the skill sets of the people that you have on board, and then understand where the gaps are and start filling those gaps. You can't be everything to everybody. A CEO or a leader literally cannot be everywhere in their company at all times. They can't be making all decisions. They have to hire good people, smart people, and enable them to make decisions and to use their resources to be able to solve problems. And I think a lot of leaders are challenged by this, especially as they grow, with wanting to be in control of all the things that happen across their company. And it's just never possible. So control the things that you have right in front of you, and then hire really good people to bring them on board and build out your leadership team to help run the business and to help achieve your shared vision, but do it in a way that that uses their strengths and their skill sets to accomplish that. And so we're at an inflection point as a company, and I call it Alliance 2.0. But I think everything that we've done from founding until kind of right up to the pandemic was Alliance 1.0. And we evolved a lot during that. There were probably many versions of 1.0, but we're at a point right now where we're looking to grow a bit more significantly. And in order to do so, we're bringing on new leaders into the organization. And we've already hired a few of those leaders, which I'm very excited about. And again, those people are bringing skill sets and perspectives and experience that I don't have. And that's really valuable to bring into the overall ecosystem, that which is the company.
I'd love for you to zoom out for a minute and look out into the future, thinking about your industry, your organization. What does the future look like through Greg's lens?
Of home care?
Yeah, I would say of home care, of the industry. What are you seeing, and how do you see yourself influencing that?
Sure. So my perspective is that, first of all, home care is a quickly growing industry and sector within the healthcare arena. So healthcare obviously is very needed and always will be, but home care and its place within the continuum of healthcare is, I feel, greatly increasing in priority and in need. The next 20 years, we have a silver tsunami. There's going to be 75 or 80 million elderly people in this country by 2030. And the resources that need to take care of them are going to need to rapidly increase and gain efficiency. But the biggest of which is probably home care. And so I think that the industry is growing and evolving on itself. I think that everybody typically wants to age at home. If you look at stats from AARP, I think 95% of people would like to age in place. They don't want to be anywhere other than the home and the place that they're comfortable in. So as a home care sector, it puts us in a very good position where our services are needed, but there's not enough caregivers. There's a massive caregiver shortage in our industry. So the whole industry has to get smarter about how we recruit, where we're finding people, how we're paying people, the kind of benefits and salaries and comp that we have for our caregivers and for the people that are doing that needs to change. So we're figuring this out for ourselves, but I think that we're able to influence the overall industry in a way that, so we're known as a concierge home care provider. So we are, provide a high value solution to people that can pay privately for care at home. And I think that what we do can also be translated to all of the industry in some way, shape, or form. Some of the best practices that we have, some of the ways that we're developing careers in caregiving, and some of the ways that we're doing care oversight and coordinating with families and engaging technology are going to be instrumental in the ways that the overall industry can help people better and can help the aging population of the United States better as we approach these overwhelming numbers of elderly coming through the population. So I think that we're raising the bar in private duty home care, which is what we do. But I think that the vast majority of home care is really delivered by Medicare or Medicaid. I think 96% of all home care that's delivered is paid for by the government through Medicare or Medicaid. So we're in a small piece of the population in private duty care. But I think that we can set the benchmark of quality of care and how it's delivered. And I have the opportunity to speak at conferences when we had conferences, and hopefully we will again soon, and engage with other people in the industry that take care of thousands and tens of thousands of people in their organization. We have 150 families that we look after, but I engage with companies that have 30 and 50,000 patients per company. And if I can influence their thinking and how they operate in some way, shape, or form, and be a model for them to strive for, or give them some ideas on how to improve their methods of delivery, then I think that we will be able to influence the overall way that care is delivered to our geriatric population and to our country.
So Greg, let's talk about you personally here. I always like to end conversations with guests by asking questions around things within your own development. What are you working on? Maybe it's a challenge you're trying to overcome. Maybe it's something you're trying to get better at, whether it's a leader or as a human being. Tell us something about you that you are looking to step more into.
So I've been on a bit of a personal journey, I would say, over the last couple of years, several years, but really since the pandemic started, in personal development. But I would say the theme of that would be back to basics. So I think when I talked about the pandemic and that we were all in a turbo and running at 100 miles an hour in all directions before this hit, and we slowed down a bit, I have really tried to carry that forward in my personal life, and I plan to do so. There's been a few basic things I've done, and some of this have been involved in books that I've read. I've read a couple of amazing books over the last year. One of them is about sleep. Another one is about breathing. But I have really focused on the basic things in my life: staying hydrated, getting 8 hours of sleep a night, which is enormously critical to all of our physical, emotional, and mental functioning, breathing properly and learning how to breathe, and then finally meditating and staying in the now. I think it's really important to be focused on this moment right here. I think the present is super valuable, and people often get fixated on the past or are anxious about the future. And I think that a lot of that is just, unfortunately, not serving them very well. So I've really tried to focus on what I'm doing in this moment. So yeah, really channeling basics and getting back to a less complicated life, spending a little bit less time with technology, meaning emails and texts, really just trying to, be smarter about, you have to still communicate, and communication is really critical for a leader and for anybody running a business, but doing so that it doesn't encapsulate, your entire day or your entire week. So those are some of the things I've been doing in terms of personal growth.
It's so interesting you brought up technology. I've been having this little interaction with myself, just noticing what it feels like to have my phone in my hand, just to take a quick second, be a little bit more mindful to say, how often do I have the phone in my hand? And then doing a quick body scan is, do I feel tension when I have my phone in my hand? And what I'm noticing is I don't need to be looking at my phone as much, and that I have a physiological response often by just having that phone in my hand. And I had never in a million years ever had any awareness to this. I just started playing with this about a month ago, going, how many times am I grabbing that an hour? and how I'll freak out if I don't have it near me. I'm like, no, I'm going to leave it downstairs. I'm going to leave it in another part of the house so that I can be totally focused. So I'm with you on what you just shared. And I, of course, love the sleep idea. So, Greg, where I want to wrap up our conversation is I want you to think about best ideas, practices as co-founder, CEO that have been most helpful to you that you want to share with anybody that's watching or listening to this conversation.
I would say authenticity is about the most important thing that anybody can think about when running a business. I think knowing what you're good at, knowing how you're going to best serve people, and really staying laser focused on what that looks like. It's very easy to get distracted from other business lines, other revenue streams, other ways that even competitors are expanding their business. That might work for them. It may not. You don't really know what that's ultimately going to be. But I think it's really critical to understand what you're good at and to stay the course. I realize that's very basic in its mindset, but I think that we have had the opportunity to do a lot of other types of businesses, plastic surgery recovery, Botox injections, using our team of nurses to go out there and deliver different types of care. But in the end, it would have been revenue generating, but wouldn't have served the mission of being the absolute best in our industry at caring for people that are at home and vulnerable. So I really think that that would be my advice to people, is to understand what you're good at and really focus on that and nothing else.
I love that. What a great way to end the conversation. Greg, thank you so much for being here with me today and sharing all that you did.
No problem. I appreciated the time and enjoyed our conversation. It was fun.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Warriors at Work show. If you are interested in learning more about what we do at the Warriors at Work show and platform, be sure to go over to my website, Jeannie Coomber, and subscribe to my monthly Warrior Playbook newsletter. I share everything that I'm up to month by month, as well as some lessons and insights that I've learned. I'm also interested in hearing any feedback you have about this conversation or future topics. So reach out to me directly on jc@jeanniecoomber.com or on LinkedIn. Be sure to tell your friends and your colleagues about this Warriors at Work conversation. Subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the best way to get this message out into the world. Be well.